Marcus Chen regained consciousness in a crystalline detention chamber, his head throbbing from whatever impact had knocked him unconscious after his exploration vessel crashed on the uncharted world his sensors had identified as potentially habitable. His first thought was relief at surviving. His second was concern when he realized he wasn't in his ship's emergency shelter, but in some kind of constructed facility with technology he didn't recognize. Then he saw his captors. A dozen alien figures watched him through the transparent wall, their expressions carrying confusion and fear that his translation implant identified clearly despite their unfamiliar facial structure. They were humanoid, bilateral symmetry, bipedal locomotion, features suggesting they were sapient and technologically advanced. What Marcus didn't immediately understand was the nature of their confusion. They weren't confused about capturing an unknown species. They were confused about capturing something their isolated colony hadn't seen in 7 generations, a male of any kind from any species. The aliens were Velarans, a civilization practicing extreme sexual dimorphism with gender-segregated social roles. This particular settlement was founded by an all-female scientific expedition that lost contact with their homeworld 3 centuries ago and adapted to survival through parthenogenetic reproduction when rescue never came. The children born here had never seen, spoken to, or conceived of males as anything beyond theoretical biology from ancient records their ancestors maintained. And now one had literally fallen from the sky into their carefully constructed single-gender society. Marcus's imprisonment wasn't hostile capture but frantic quarantine, as the colony's leadership tried to figure out what to do with a complete unknown that might carry pathogens, pheromones, or behavioral patterns their isolated genetics had no immunity against. Marcus's attempts to communicate revealed cascading misunderstandings rooted in the fact that none of the Velarans had any framework for interpreting male behavior. His voice, standard human male vocal range, deeper than most human females, was interpreted as territorial threat display because in Velaran biology, deeper vocalizations indicated aggression. His broader physique compared to their gracile builds was cataloged as evidence of violent capability rather than just sexual dimorphism. His attempts at friendly gestures were being analyzed as potential threat behaviors because they had no context for male body language. Everything he did was being filtered through scientific frameworks designed for studying potentially hostile fauna, rather than diplomatic protocols for first contact. Researcher Velith was one of the few Velarans willing to approach his cell directly rather than observing from distance. She explained through the translation interface that slowly learned to bridge their languages. Our ancestors were scientific expeditions studying this world's unique geology when catastrophic equipment failure stranded them permanently. With no hope of rescue, they adapted, activating parthenogenetic reproduction that our species possessed as evolutionary backup, eliminating need for males in our isolated population, raising 7 generations who have never known anything except single-gender civilization. Your records include information about males, Marcus said carefully. You know we exist. Theoretical knowledge, Velith corrected. Ancient documentation our ancestors maintained. But none of current population has ever interacted with males. You're the first male of any species we've encountered. Your crashed vessel didn't just introduce unknown alien. It introduced entire concept that our society has spent 7 generations adapting away from. So I'm a walking philosophical crisis, Marcus summarized. You're proof that our grand experiment in single-gender civilization was always temporary, Velith agreed. And your arrival just made that temporariness explicit. The colony's leadership debated what Marcus represented through arguments he could overhear through his cell's communication systems. Conservative faction. His presence contaminates our adapted society. We should maintain quarantine until he can be safely removed. Reintroducing male presence, even from alien species, will destabilize social structures built on single-gender assumptions. Progressive faction. Our ancestors maintained records of dimorphic biology because they knew parthenogenesis was temporary solution. Contact with our homeworld might eventually resume. We need to reintegrate with dimorphic Velaran society, and this alien represents opportunity to teach our children about male existence before that reintegration becomes crisis. Marcus listened to these debates, realizing he'd become ethics problem about identity and adaptation. The colony had spent 7 generations building society around single-gender assumptions, and his presence forced them to confront that those assumptions were contingent on continued isolation rather than fundamental truth about their species. "Why won't you just let me repair my vessel and leave?" Marcus asked Velith during one of her research sessions, where she studied his behavior through careful observation. "Because we can't risk you reporting our location," Velith explained. "Renewed contact might mean forced reintegration with our homeworld's dimorphic society before we're ready. Keeping you isolated is the only way to control the timeline of our civilization's transformation." "So I'm a prisoner to protect your isolation," Marcus said. "You're a bridge we're not ready to cross," Velith corrected. "But your presence means the crossing is inevitable, whether we're ready or not." The transformation happened gradually as younger Velarans, those born most recently, became intensely curious about the male in the crystalline cell. They asked questions their elders struggled to answer because theoretical knowledge from ancient records didn't prepare them for reality of male existence. His voice, his physique, his gestures, all the things the older generation found threatening, were becoming normalized as younger Velarans spent time observing him and learning that males were people rather than theoretical biology. Velith advocated for limited integration rather than continued quarantine. Trying to maintain ignorance about male existence when there's a living example in our colony is futile and potentially more destabilizing than controlled education about dimorphic interaction. The younger generation needs to learn about male existence before we reintegrate with our homeworld. This alien represents opportunity for that education. The colony's leadership eventually agreed to compromise. Marcus could leave his cell under supervision, could interact with Velarans who volunteered for contact, could work on repairing his vessel, but he could not broadcast his location or leave until the colony had time to prepare for the implications of renewed external contact. 6 months later, Marcus's vessel was repaired but his departure delayed, because the Velarans were using his presence to teach their population about dimorphic biology and male interaction. His final log entry acknowledged the transformation. "Crashed on uncharted world, awoke imprisoned by females who'd never encountered males due to 7 generations of parthenogenetic isolation. Initial quarantine driven by fear of unknown contaminating their adapted society. Currently serving as living educational example while colony debates whether my presence represents contamination or bridge to their species' dimorphic past. Recommend updating first contact protocols. Some isolated colonies have adapted so thoroughly to their circumstances that reintroducing standard biology becomes philosophical crisis, requiring careful management." The younger Velarans treated him as person rather than specimen now, asking about his culture and his life, rather than just documenting his biological differences. Familiarity with male existence was always possible, but required exposure their elders had tried to prevent. Marcus remained on the planet voluntarily while the colony prepared for larger transformation. His presence represented not just his individual existence, but what he symbolized about their isolation ending, and their need to reconcile 7 generations of single-gender adaptation with reality that their species was always dimorphic. Contact with that reality was always inevitable. His crashed vessel just accelerated the timeline, one philosophical crisis at a time, The detention cell became classroom, the scientific specimen became teacher, and the isolated colony began preparing for the day when their carefully maintained separation from their dimorphic past would finally end, and they'd need to remember how to be the species their ancestors were before adaptation made them forget. Marcus's presence was just the beginning of that remembering.